All right, guys. Good afternoon, early evening, depending on where you are watching this. Thank everybody for being here today with the Santa Rita Hills and the 20th anniversary of the Santa Rita Hills receiving its AVA status, and one of a series that we are doing here talking about the appellation and what has happened over the years. I do want to begin briefly by mentioning that Wine and Fire, our signature event that occurs in August every year, is going to be occurring again this year in person. Thankfully, cheers everybody. That's a great thing that we actually are able to do this in person again. It'll be August 12th through the 15th. You are able to get tickets for many of the events already. There's going to be some great things, including a Sanford and Benedict tasting, a Pioneer dinner, sparkling wine, some library wines, a lot of fun things. And you can get that and go over to Santa Rita Hills, STARITAHILLS, StarRitaHills.com. Click on the anniversary event page and you can find out about that. Here it is, popped up on the screen as if magic somehow. I had nothing to do with it, so from my point of view, it is magic. I am thrilled today for us to talk about something called Leap of Faith, which is the plantings in the Santa Rita Hills area in the 1990s, and have some fantastic guests today to talk about it. Ron, Steve, and Kathy, and I am thrilled that y'all are here. Thank you for joining me and letting me join with you. Hell, thank you for letting me come into the appellation even and buy grapes from y'all for the last, I don't know, since 2021 years. So I appreciate that I've been welcomed down there so much. I thought we would begin by, let's just do a quick in order, in chronological order, and then we'll get into greater detail. But just a quick, everybody introduce themselves. And so Ron, then Steve, then Kathy, in chronological order, vineyard-wise. I'm not saying age-wise. Please don't mistake me on that one. Ron, I don't know, and I'm not going to guess. I am smart enough to not do that. Ron, why don't you just tell everybody who you are, and then Steve, and then Kathy.
Okay, well, I'm Ron Piazza. I own Mount Carmel Vineyards. I'm a little embarrassed. I'm surrounded by vineyard royalty here, and I'm basically a guy that found the right place at the right time, and that was about it. But I'll tell you a little how the story evolved. In the 70s, I had a very dear friend by the name of Paul Albrecht. Paul had a little place called 11 Oaks on Alamo Cantata Road. I would go up there and help him. His best friend was also Walter Babcock, and we would go out in the, I guess, the mid-'80s and help around the place with Walter, and then drink a lot more wine.
Ron, were you in the wine business at all in any way, shape, or form then, or what were you doing?
You know, I earn my living. I'm an owner of McDonald's restaurants, so no. Before then, I had nothing to do with wine. So we would. Paul and I wanted to do a little larger. He only had 3 acres. He was doing Sauvignon Blanc. We wanted to do other varieties, and we asked Walter, if you were going to plant today, Walter, where would you plant? He pulled out the map and took a pencil and shoved it right on one spot, and he said, "That I think this is the place to plant vineyards. If that's what I could do, I would do it." And for almost a year, Paul and I drove up and down Sweeney Canyon Road, making dust tracks and everything, trying to find a way to find a vineyard in the area that Walter said we should grow. We were unsuccessful until I picked up the newspaper. I live here in the Lakewood, Long Beach area, and there was a cloistered group of nuns on Ocean Boulevard in Long Beach that was going to sell their place, and they had bought 300 acres up in the Santa Rita Hills area, but it wasn't certainly that then. And they had a problem. It was an ag preserve, and they needed a lot more plants than they did their building. So I happened to know the bishop. He got me an audience, and for a year, I negotiated a lease through a little confessional with Mother Superior, and that's how we got the rights to plant Mount Carmel Vineyards. And while they were up there trying to build their monastery, we put in, literally, Paul and I, we were on a slim budget. We did all the plumbing ourselves, all the plants ourselves. We ordered the plants, had them delivered. Brian Babcock gave us some tips on what to buy and what to plant. We've planted our Chardonnay, which is basically the Wente clone. We've got 7 acres of that. And we've got the rest of the 23 acres is Pinot. We've replanted a couple of times. We started with Vineyard and 777 and so on and so forth. The first 3 or 4 years, Brian made the fruit, and then we had Jim Clendenin bought some fruit, and Rick Longoria bought some fruit, and then Greg Brewer and Steve Clifton, they wanted the fruit and they wanted exclusivity, so we gave them exclusivity for a few years. My friend Paul Albrecht passed away, so it's my wife and I who own the vineyard now. And we started in 2012 Mail Road Wine, which gets their grapes exclusively from Mount Carmel. And that's kind of the story. I guess the interesting thing is when we first looked at the property, there was nobody around. There was only one vineyard. It was across the river, what we looked at, and that was obviously Sanford Benedict Vineyard. We knew we were probably in a good spot. Didn't know for sure. After the first year of planting, I called Richard Sanford and asked him, would it be okay if I went over to your vineyard and got some cuttings? And he met us out there, and I think he charged me 10 cents a cutting, and we made about 1,800 cuttings, peeled them in, and then we planted them the next year, and we get the very best fruit from those cuttings that we have in the entire vineyard. So that's...
Let me ask you a couple questions real quick while we're at it here. You mentioned driving up and down Sweeney Canyon Road. Obviously, the area, those people who know Santa Rita Hills, being an east-west valley, the only one actually on the west coast of North America, the route that more often that visitors are traveling is probably 246, and then others are going to be traveling over on Santa Rita Road. Sweeney Canyon is probably not a road that many people have traversed up and down. Did you specifically look at Sweeney Canyon versus those other areas?
Well, that's where that was the only way to find a property where Walter had put the pencil mark on the map. I mean, you couldn't get there. You'd have to cross the San Ynez River if you were going to try to use Santa Rosa Road. We got into a 4-wheel drive every weekend, and we went up and down, and we probably violated a lot of property rights and things like that. But as you probably know, there was no water up there. Yeah. So even if we found a good piece of property, it was very difficult to get water. So when we found the nuns who needed planting, and so we solved the problem for them. They built their monastery. And they got approval because they were surrounded by our vines, and we thought that was going to work out perfect for them and for us. As it turned out, the nuns went bankrupt, and but we're still there.
And there was water on that property.
We put a well in right at the San Ynez River.
Okay.
And we pumped it all the way up to the top of the hill. We actually put in 3 30,000-gallon cisterns, and one was for us, and the other 2 were going to be for the monastery building.
So, I mean, in some ways, with the nuns, it's appropriate. You turn water into wine, you could say, in some way, shape, or form, I guess.
I would say the nuns did that. I don't want to take credit for that.
Let me ask you, at the 23 acres that you have planted, how much acreage did you buy? How much acreage do you own to have 23 planted? And is that the maximum amount that you could have there?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but we originally had the rights to all 300 acres, and Paul and I only had the money to plant the 25 at first, and then the nuns went. They went bankrupt, and things went through the courts, and little by little, that 300-acre opportunity got whittled down to where now I can only plant where I'm at.
Okay. And then lastly, I was going to ask on the clones. You mentioned, and forgive me, I don't know Chardonnay clones as well as Pinot, but I do know some about Chardonnay clones. But with Pinot, you mentioned Pommard 777. That would have been pretty early for 777 to be planted right on.
Yeah, but we were able to get those, and we got them in. So.
Okay. And so you said you've done some replanting. Is that for any particular reason? Just the age of the vines, or people wanting different clones, or what?
Yeah, some of the grapes that were really on the top of the hill, where the limestone and the diatomaceous earth is maybe, I don't know, it's on the surface and it goes, potentially a foot or two thick. We've tried different clones up there, so to try to get enough growth from them. It's been very difficult. The wind is an issue up there, so we've tried different types of plants in order to get a production where we still only get 2.5 tons to the acre, but it's a pretty right where we're at. It's a pretty severe climate.
Sure. All right, so Steve, those of you who are careful viewers of this will notice I had white wine in my glass, but I've moved to a red now, and it actually is the wine that I make from the Clos Pepe vineyard, your home and the place that you bought. This is the Beaumarchais joint venture that I have with Philippe Candy, but obviously I started buying Pinot from you under the Syrah wines label back in 2000. But you started getting fruit a bit before that in 96, and you purchased the property, you found the property. What led you to getting into Clos Pepe?
Thanks, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here and with my fellow vintners. My Italian immigrant grandparents made a barrel of wine every year in North Jersey in their cellars, which people in New Jersey have and folks in California don't have. And that started my interest in it. My wife, Kathy, and I are both lawyers, and in the 90s, we saw the end of our legal career approaching, but we weren't quite ready to retire. So we decided we'd go into the vineyard business. She had a small house, interesting enough, in Long Beach, and I planted the first, only, and oldest vineyard in Long Beach, California. And we made homemade wine for a number of years. I had run into Jeff Newton from Coastal Vineyard Care, who planted most of the Santa Rita Hills in the 80s, and I had talked to him about where to go if I wanted to grow Pinot, and his remark was to go west of the 101. We went up to Napa, looked hard at Napa. The problem with Napa was not only price, but given our schedule, you can't get up there in less than 3 days, a day up, a day there, and a day back because of travel. We looked down at Temecula, found some nice white wines, unimpressed with the red wines. We looked at Paso, again, making some really killer red wines, but not Pinot Noir. And so we decided to focus on this area. And following Jeff's advice, we looked. At the time we were looking, there were only 2 vineyards, or 2 wineries on 246. That was Babcock and then Huber, which is now called Chapel. And so for about 6 months to a year, we made a series of bids. So we bid on what is now Zodovich and didn't get that property. We bid on Melville, didn't get that property. We bid on another property west of us and were outbid by llama farmers. And this was a horse ranch, and I got a call from my real estate person on a Friday when we're driving up that it was available. We saw it. Kathy, my wife, said to me, make sure you get the place, but don't spend too much money. And so we put in a bid over Labor Day of 1994, and it was accepted, and we moved in early December of 94. And then we planted, at that point in time, we planted half the property, 12 acres, 14 acres to Chardonnay in 96 and another 14 to Pinot Noir in 2000. As an aside, I'd met a number of the prominent winemakers on the other side of the 101, and the universal response I got when I told them what I was thinking is, you can't go there. It's too cold. You'll never get the fruit right. Which is true for Bordeaux style grapes, but not true for Pinot Noir. And that's one of the reasons why we grow great Pinot here is the cool weather. And so we planted in 96 and 94, and we're fortunate enough to have people like Adam and Brian Loring and AP Vin and a bunch of other folks make wine from our grapes and did a great job with it, got great scores with it. We've sort of been the beneficiaries of all your hard work and success.
But you actually also put in a great deal of effort. I mean, I know as far as marketing the vineyard, getting people to know the vineyard, that type of thing. I believe you are even the author of a book about the entire process that you had as far as buying the property and getting it up and running.
Yeah, I did. I wrote that after we moved up here, and unfortunately, it never made it to the New York Times bestseller. But so I've still got a few copies, and I'll be glad to autograph them for anybody who wants one.
So, for what it's worth, having looked on Amazon, I could buy a used copy right now for $801.77 is what it's currently going for. So, I assume that buying directly from you, there might be a bit of a discount over the $801 price, or?
Yeah, you can buy an unused copy that I'll even autograph for a mere $30 or a couple of bottles of wine, whichever you prefer.
Sure. Good. I appreciate that. So at the time with the plantings, what led you specifically to lead with Chardonnay instead of Pinot?
I was advised then by the viticulturist that plant half the property in Chardonnay because that was a, quote, cash cow, and you could always sell it and put the other half in Pinot. And after about 4 or 5 years, came to the conclusion that really you should be growing mostly Pinot here and a little Chardonnay. So of the 14 acres that were in Chardonnay, we budded over 10 acres to Pinot Noir and kept 4 acres of Chardonnay, 2 in Dijon clone and 2, again, interestingly enough, in the Wente clone, which both have done very well here. Then we ended up with a total of Chardonnay and 24 acres of Pinot.
I assume that you also discovered quickly that cash cow and grape growing don't go hand in hand. They're somewhat antithetical to each other. Those terms don't really work all that well.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. With the Pinot clones that you planted, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get some 115 there, some Pomards, some 667. I mean, you've got a decent mix, but not a giant mix of clones. What led you specifically to those? Was it Jeff that pointed you in that direction, Jeff Newton?
Yeah, he wanted to plant to basically the 115 and the 667, and I told him I really wanted to put in some French clones, and that's how we ended up with the Pomard. And then we put in a little bit of the 777, which, as with Ron, was at that point in time fairly new and fairly untried. But that's how we ended up with that mix. And of all of them, the Pomard, as you know, we've had this discussion before, is my favorite, and I think that's what makes the best wine off our property.
And the other thing that I do know about your property, know well, is that lower section is very cold. I mean, it is surprisingly chilly as you get down right by the road there. And I know that Ron was mentioning earlier, I mean, water and finding some available water was a deal. You've got a good-sized pond there. I don't know the challenges you might have had with water, but I know you've had some challenges with frost and that potential there at your vineyard.
Yeah, that's correct. This was a horse ranch, so the prior owner put in a pond because he wanted the aesthetics for it, and the well produces about 45 gallons a minute, which is more than enough to fill the pond. And then there's a 30,000-gallon cistern in the hill for the domestic water. And up until about 2008, we really never had any serious frost issues. And then in 2008, we lost 2/3 of our crop to frost and went from about 85 tons to about 25. And the 25 that we got was not of a normal quality that we would like. And after that, we started putting in serious frost equipment and frost machines. The pond and the well isn't big enough to use the water method, so we had to go with wind machines.
Great. Well, we'll get back in a minute to you. Let's move on to Kathy. Kathy is, I got to say, is one of my favorite people in that she gets fruit and has gotten fruit, as I have for a long time when I was at Syrah, from Oregon all the way down to Santa Rita. There was at least a couple of times that we passed each other in the Portland airport at times you were coming in and I was heading out, or vice versa. And so basically that means that you're as crazy as I am, which to do that kind of trek geographically, which I appreciate. It makes me feel like I'm not the only one. So tell us, Kathy, about your property and how you got started and your process of finding the property there.
One of the great things about the last is I get such great information from those great vintners that spoke before me. And I just wanted to tell Ron that it's a great time to catch up and learn things about each other. And I not only have a passion and love for Pinot Noir, and that became a quest for me, but also for Sauvignon Blanc. And one of the greatest Sauvignon Blanc vineyards was 11 Oaks, Paul's vineyard. Yes. And I went to graduate school with Brian Babcock. And so his 11 Oaks vineyard Sauvignon Blanc was just this quintessential Bordeaux-esque, just the greatest thing on earth for me. And it may have been one of the reasons that I looked to San Ynez Valley when it came to looking for land. My history is kind of interesting because after about 8 years working on the North Coast, I decided to focus on making just a couple of varietals and decided the ones that won my heart, the ones that I became passionate about, were Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc. And the curious thing is they both have different climate demands. And as a very, very small producer, I think my first vintage was 150 cases. I was thrilled to be buying fruit from Sierra Madre Vineyard from Dale Hampton up in Santa Maria. And, it was very exciting times. And the premise of my whole brand was to have diversification of the kinds of Pinot I was making. So the most different I could get and still physically be hands-on was to go to Oregon and take that challenge on, because that vintage was about a month later. But I needed to be present. So Sierra Madre Vineyard reached a point where they wanted to sell the property, and I knew that I was losing my source of Pinot Noir, and I needed to look around. And really the only growers that were selling Pinot were Sierra Madre, Biennacido, and Sanford and Benedict. And I have to say most of it was committed. So for me to carry on my commitment to Santa Barbara County, where I had previously been purchasing grapes, was going to be to invest in property and take control. And quite frankly, I was hoping for a 20-acre vineyard, but my quest happened by tasting a tremendous amount of wines and deciding if Santa Maria Valley or San Ynez Valley was more in tune to what I was looking for. And quite frankly, when I tasted the wines that Richard Sanford made from the early 70s, the sweetness on that Pinot and the intensity of character and the delicacy of the wines and the longevity of the wines were just phenomenal. And I decided to focus my search in the cool climate, the western part of San Ynez Valley, which of course was before the Santa Rita Hills AVA was established. And Jeff Newton, who I knew for many years, who I bought Sauvignon Blanc from, also helped me in my search for ground. And I reasoned that if that wine from Sanford and Benedict was so great, and knowing that our valleys had this east-west running profile, that if I could get something in the neighborhood of that vineyard, I knew I would share the same soil types, similar temperatures, similar flavor profiles. And so I actually approached a flower farm directly across the street that was owned by the Lompoc family, the Bodgers, who grew flowers for seed. And so this area had only been partially planted for flowers, but it was something, it was 100-acre property. Actually, it's 133 acres, and it's a 100-acre minimum parcel in this area as dictated by the county. So I had to think very creatively. I started developing it. I picked my clones by tasting as many clones made by other producers, both in Oregon, in Davis, and in the Santa Barbara area. And ultimately, I think like Steve, I focused on a handful. I didn't want too many, but I wanted enough to have what was going to be great for the property, which was still an unknown. So I split the property to be about a third of Pommard, which historically is what was planted in both Oregon and San Ynez Valley and in Santa Maria Valley, and brought fame to the area for Pinot Noir. I mean, it was hugely successful, but at that time, the Dijon clones also became available. And so I included 113, for instance, a little bit of 114, 115, 667, and 777. And there's about 3 different root stocks where the concept was to get protection from a future outbreak of phylloxera. And so my blocks kind of hopscotch in clones and rootstock combinations throughout the property. So I only retain about 15% of the 100 acres for my brand Fiddlehead Cellars. And then these other guys, I sell my fruit to other fabulous winemakers from Napa, Santa Barbara, all around.
So that's one of the things I wanted to ask all of y'all about a little bit was at that particular time, early on, really before Santa Rita Hills was an AVA. I mean, it was in process there for a while in the late 1990s, but it wasn't an AVA yet. What was it like to sell fruit, to find buyers? And I said all of y'all. I mean, let's start up with Ron, but then Steve and Kathy as well. What the process of finding people to buy, was it easy? Was it difficult? What was it like, and what was the feel at that time? Ron?
At the time, I don't recall it being hard. I had Brian Babcock, who wanted as much as he could get, and then Rick Longoria, who probably made the best fruit. Not that anybody else, I don't want to discount anyone else, but Rick made probably the best Pinot that I've ever tasted off the property. And he wanted some, and then we just kept able to be selling it. And I really haven't had trouble selling that fruit for the whole 33 years.
And Steve, for you as well. I mean, you were pretty subscribed early on, right?
Yeah, at that point in time in the late '90s, there was a lot of interest in Pinot Noir out here, and I was fortunate enough that you were an early buyer, and then whatever you did, as Brian Loring said, he just followed Uncle Sid around and bought grapes from the same vineyards, and then AP Vin in San Francisco followed Brian around and bought the same grapes. So we had a lot of different producers purchase grapes from us, but basically we never really had any trouble finding people who were interested in our fruit. The Pinot Noir Chardonnay was their issue. That's one of the reasons why I budded over 10 acres to Pinot, to provide more Pinot than Chardonnay.
And then Kathy, with a larger property somewhat, I mean, how did that work out for you? Was that a little more of a challenge, or not necessarily?
Yeah, well, I have to say, even in the early years, I mean, I remember walking the property with Mike Bonacorsi,
Yep.
and he eyeballed the block, and that has forever since remained the block that has gone to the Bonacorsi brand. Hitching Post, has committed for a long time, and I've been lucky to have some Napa buyers. But, I did something very different, because my property was large, much larger than I needed for myself. And I'm a small brand doing everything. So early on, I separated my vineyard from my winery. And then I partnered up with a much larger winery from Napa so that they could take away half of the grapes, and that I then could resell a portion of my grapes. And it became a wonderful partnership that it looks daunting to deal with so much fruit, but in fact, everyone has worked with it has made just a stellar wine. And I was thrilled to have a wonderful pool of winemakers promoting a vineyard that was much larger than I could promote on my own. It was, a real wonderful joint effort.
And Kathy, is yours only Pinot, or do you have anything else? Do you have Chardonnay there as well, or is it
Well, thanks for that little entree. The thing I'm most proud of is maybe the Gruner Veltliner that I planted back in 2012. I was going to start a whole Gruner vineyard that didn't come to fruition. And so I have a little less than 3 acres planted. That was a big experiment, and it's a fabulous site, and the grapes are super happy, and I sell a little bit of that fruit, but I've made it from a dry white wine to a late harvest, and it's very easy to do, much easier than making a late harvest from Sauvignon Blanc, say, in my opinion. But also my vineyard partners were interested in Chardonnay. So there was a small block of 5 acres of Chardonnay that was dedicated to their brand that actually recently I've been able to resell. And just last year was told it was some of the best Chardonnay that some of these small producers have made. So, I'm a believer. It's great for all those varieties. It gets down to what you can sell the fruit for, because the farming costs are the same for all of them. Yeah. And, right now the demand for what you can sell the Pinot for just beats out the Chardonnay, I would say. But it's a lovely wine. And there also is a demand for any offbeat, cool climate varietal you can think of, just to get diversity in what we can do in this AVA.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point about Santa Rita Hills in general is, I mean, certainly I've been in love with the Pinot there for quite some time. My ability to make white wine has always been pretty limited. I don't seem to be great at making whites necessarily, but with reds, I'm all right. But I always find it fascinating to find someone who's got some Syrah or someone who's got some Grenache or someone who's got just something different and unique out there in the AVA. And then certainly we got like the sparkling wine event coming up. I think people are thinking outside the box now in a way that maybe they weren't thinking outside the box 20-ish years ago. Although at that time, honestly, or in the 30 years ago, in the case of Ron, 25 years ago, in the case of Kathy and Steve, Pinot was outside the box 25 years ago. I mean, that's what people always realized, that was really pushing the envelope at the time.
Absolutely. Especially a rich Pinot. Everybody was, you could get a light Pinot, but it was very hard to get a Pinot that had body and, a lot of tannins, and we were able to do that in the Santa Rita Hills.
Yeah. And I like to describe it as layers and also have a wonderful spice component. So where, we have this great black cherry component to, I think, the wines made from all of our vineyards. It seems to have, it's still Pinot Noir. It is not Syrah, but it is such a layered wine that it also, I think, is one of the things that offers longevity in those wines.
Well, as we get into kind of that wine style aspect, I mean, I think it's fascinating here that we have Steve on 246, Kathy, you're on Santa Rosa Road, Ron, you're in between on Sweeney Canyon there. For the people out there who might not be as familiar with the area, would any one of you kind of want to summarize like the differences between those particular roads? And obviously each place has got its own unique characteristics, but we're talking in broad terms. But do you see any real differences either in the physical layout of the land? I mean, that probably would be easier to talk about more calcareous soil in one or the other, that kind of thing. But then on the wines and the style of the wines that come from those particular areas. Anybody? No?
Well, I just wanted to comment that, not only is there diversity in temperature from west to east, which is fantastic in all cool climate as these varietals demand, but also we have intense clay component and a sandy component, a sandy soil component. And I think it's so interesting because on the 246 side, sometimes the lower parts are some parts are sandy and parts have clay. On the Santa Rosa Road side, we almost are all clay. And I think that it's hard to say because some of these larger vineyards have diversity. I tend to get a fabulous perfume aromatic out of the sandier soil wines. And I find that the clay adds this depth of spice to the wines. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would say one is preferred. I think they both add this difference in dimension.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other, but I think there are some real unique differences. And I think I don't know as an association how much we want to stress that. And I see this in other areas as well. I mean, Russian River tries to do different neighborhoods. San Lucia, there's a difference between the north and the south. Santa Rita, we're talking about 3 different parts.
Yeah.
For the American public, sometimes it's challenging enough to get them to recognize Santa Rita Hills or San Lucia Highlands or Russian River. I mean, so we don't want to overcomplicate it, but I think there are real differences within a relatively small area like the Santa Rita Hills from west to east, but also from 246 to Sweeney Canyon to Santa Rosa Road. There are differences between them.
There's a lot of Monterey shale and chert that is broken up in our soils that adds to the drainage component, and also, I think kind of minerality that comes through in the wines. That is very exciting. And then, of course, the diatomaceous earth was addressed that is indigenous to this area, which, it doesn't really add nutrition, but it affects the soil composition for sure.
And I would just say that, for instance, Mount Carmel goes there's quite a bit of difference in elevation from basically just above the riverbed that goes all the way up to the top of the hill. It could be 1,500 feet in difference between some of the vines. So that also plays a role in it, as well as the stress that the environment puts on the wine or on the grapes.
I think one of the other issues, or one of the other differences, is the clones that are planted. There's a variety of clonal difference between, I think, some parts of 246 and parts of Santa Rosa Road, and that's it's going to take another generation or two or three for somebody to figure out the better clones to plant here, where if you go to more established places like Burgundy, for example, there's not as much clonal variation in the same area. There's variation between various sections, but not as much diversity. And then the rootstocks also make a difference. So I think it's going to take another generation or two before we figure out exactly what does well here and what one should be seriously planting.
Well, and along that line, Steve, you're talking about another generation or two. As we see climate change and those types of things go on, maybe what we were thinking was going to work, maybe changing, not just based on experience, but based on that as well. And I don't know, how are y'all seeing much difference over the last, we're talking 20-ish years that y'all been in this, 25, 30 in the case of wine almost. What are you seeing as far as changing climate? Is there much difference here?
What I'm seeing is that we're actually getting older than we were when we first purchased the property in the mid-90s, that the temperature change is more variable, and it's varying towards being cooler rather than warmer. At least that's been our experience.
I would say the same thing. We didn't have to worry about frost in the early years, but we certainly, 2013, 14, we had quite a bit of damage and frost on our Chardonnay. So, yeah, I would say the cooling aspect is certainly been a problem more later than earlier.
I think one of the things I've seen, and I've noticed it in Oregon, perhaps even more than other places, but the extremes are greater. It's not, I think for a long time we called things global warming. It's not global warming. Y'all are talking about cooler than normal and all that, but there are more extremes. There are dry, when the year is dry, it's drier than it has been. When it's windier, it's just, we're having to deal with more extreme conditions than before. Tell me about wind exposure also. That's something else I wanted to ask about, because one of the things when I first started buying grapes down there, I was surprised at the small cluster size, the thicker skin berries. In Russian River and San Lucia Highlands, a lot of times it was 4 or 5 clusters a pound. I would get 8 or 10 clusters a pound off your vineyard, Steve. That was a big difference. And I think it resulted in different wines there with those smaller clusters. And I think the wind in part was responsible for that. Anybody have any thoughts on that as well?
Well, also the part of it has to be the orientation of the vineyard, whether you're planting your rows east-west or north-south. When we came up here, the conventional wisdom was you planted east-west and let the wind blow through, and that would help with various kinds of problems in the vineyard, but many of us started planting north-south. And when you plant north-south, the rows that are exposed to the wind really get beat up. We've got a couple sections where if we get a pound of grapes out of a vine, we're having a good day because of the wind exposure. And obviously, it gets better the further you go into the vineyard, but that does make a difference.
Yeah, we have the same issues. We have some protected vines, and they really flourish, and you have to really worry about thinning them versus the ones that are right in the wind. You don't have to worry about dropping any of that fruit.
I love the wind. I find it keeps our vineyard very even in temperature. We get lots of humidity from the fog bank that settles in, and the wind helps to dry out the clusters in the leaves and reduce mildew pressure. It's not always a cozy place to be because the wind is persistent and predictable, especially this year, a very cool year and very windy also. And I worry more about our set because of the wind than I do about it. I'm just so used to it. Whether the wind is more intense now, the temperatures I think do have more extremes. I agree with that. But the wind has always been there, but I look at it as a huge benefit to preserving our cool climate in areas that really are warming up quickly. And it's one of the beauties of the Santa Rita Hills.
So one thing I want to mention for people out there who are watching this is, we're getting fruit from a lot of different areas. Like I have historically from Oregon all the way down to Santa Rita Hills. In 2020, a very challenging year throughout the West Coast with fires and smoke issues and all that. Santa Barbara County was one of the areas that came through virtually unscathed as far as any issues go. And it was a real benefit to being in the Santa Rita Hills was that in 2020, you didn't really deal with any of the smoke taint issues that we dealt with throughout most of California and Oregon as well. I think that's huge. And so I think from a consumer point of view, they're going to be able to buy both whites. I mean, whites did pretty good throughout the West Coast, really, but whites and reds from the Santa Rita Hills and Santa Barbara County as a whole, and feel comfortable about doing that while they may not be able to do that or should be more cautious in doing that perhaps in other areas.
You're right. We were very fortunate in 2020. Unfortunately, you folks in Northern California got hit really hard with the fire problems.
And it's very telling when you look at a map and you see that throat of east-west mountain ranges that even if there was a fire, it pushes everything inward to the east. And so, it's this little sweet spot along the California coast that, I just feel so lucky because it's so special. It really has its own unique personality because of our climate and our breezes and our temperatures and those soils that we were talking about earlier. Really lends itself to really, just great, tasty wines.
Kathy's right. We've had some.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Kathy's right. We've had some serious fires in the city and north and south of Santa Barbara where there have been hundreds and thousands of acres have burned. But because of the east-west winds, all that stuff stays on the other side of the 101, and we've had very little ash falling on the property. Once in a while, when they have a really big fire to the north of us, you can see a slight dusting, but nothing very serious. And so we've been quite fortunate in that regard.
So as we kind of, I mean, a couple of questions that are both kind of historical, but also they point forward, and we'll kind of end or get close to the end on this. You know, this was kind of this seminar, the session was titled Leap of Faith, and all of you took this leap of faith in the 1990s and planting these vineyards at a time when Pinot was an underdog. The area was not yet known as the Santa Rita Hills. I mean, there were just a lot of things that have changed dramatically over time. In 2001, 20 years ago, the area officially got the Santa Rita Hills designation. Then you had Sideways that came out in 2004 and created this big push for Pinot Noir and increasing plantings and all of that. How did those types of events change the area? I mean, for better, for worse? How did things get? And could somebody come in nowadays and do what y'all did and buy land, get started again? Is it possible? And I assume it probably could be possible, but might require a significantly larger bankroll than any of the four of us. I mean, maybe we could combine together somehow and we could do something, but it would require a larger bankroll now than it would back in the days. What has changed, and for better, for worse? I mean, let's just be honest with everybody. In those 20 to 30 years that y'all been doing this.
Yeah, when we were looking, the sort of conventional wisdom was that plantable land was 5,000 an acre, unplantable was 2. And I've got a good friend of mine who's in the vegetable business, and he was looking for property to grow those little peppers, the multicolored peppers you see in the stores. And he ended up buying about 30 acres on the corner of Drum Canyon and Highway 246 and Mail Road. And he spent $65,000 an acre or thereabouts, and he ended up there, even though his office and business is in Santa Maria, because he couldn't find anything in that price range. So the price of plantable land has really gone up, and there's going to be not only competition from the vegetable folks, we're also getting competition from the cannabis people who are looking for plantable land as well. And so I think we were lucky and fortunate to get in when we did at that point in time.
I think between what it costs to basically grow your grapes, as well as what the cost is for planting and purchasing property, you better love what you're doing, because you're not going to make any money in today's environment if you start from scratch now. I just certainly I wouldn't be able to afford it. We did it on a shoestring back then.
But also, I want to really remind everyone that one of the great things that we all have to offer is the vine age of the plants that we're working with, and the history of those vines, and just the kind of fruit that we have coming off our vineyards is different from a newly planted vineyard, even if you could afford it.
Yeah.
It's just one of those great traits that I like to remember we have. But for me, it was a huge leap of faith, because I had no money, and the only way I could buffer it was to plant it near a successful vineyard, because it was the best confidence that I had that it was a good decision.
The other thing that I don't think people often correlate, think about was at that time also was kind of a rise in this new idea of custom crush, that you could go make your wine at someone else's place using their equipment. You pay them a fee, obviously, but you go to some other winery and you do that. So that allowed all of y'all to sell sometimes to wineries that historically would be considered virtual wineries, or people who weren't really going to be able to get into the business, because the cash expenditure to have your own press and destimmer and tanks and facility and all of that was so great. So that combination of when y'all's vineyards were coming on, y'all's, my texting comes out every now and then, forgive me, but y'all's vineyards and the rise of wineries making wine through custom production process at other places, those went hand in hand together and really opened up a number of outlets for the fantastic grapes that you all grow to go out there.
But the great thing is the interest in preserving the character of where the grapes are grown. And Santa Rita Hills definitely offers something that you cannot get in Oregon. You can't get in Russian River. You can only get here in Santa Rita Hills. And there are enough people working with this fruit that have proven that this is a very special place for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, cool climate Syrah.
Yep.
So let me just end. Anybody have any final thoughts, comments, anything I didn't ask about that you want to share before we call this a wrap after an hour or so? I'm sure everybody needs to be drinking more as we are talking more. So any thoughts from any of you, things that you missed out on, or actually things you're looking forward to in the future, things that are exciting you about your property, about the Santa Rita Hills, about Pinot Chardonnay, whatever you want to chat about.
I appreciate Steve and Kathy letting me join this. That's very nice.
Well, you're welcome, sir. Glad you started it so we could follow you. All the good things you guys have been doing up there. I think one of the interesting challenges is going to be for the next generation of whether or not you're going to have small family-owned wineries, given the cost of land, given the regulations, and given the scarcity of labor. I can foresee that there'll be pressure for consolidation and to get efficiencies from a scale, which none of the three of us have done. We've all done it the old-fashioned way. But I see that as one of the challenges for the Santa Rita Hills in the future.
Steve, I hope you're wrong, though, because that's what makes us so great, is that we have so many small winemakers and small custom folks, doing their own thing. I believe that that's so much different than all the other places we compete with.
Well, one of the things we haven't seen yet is co-op vineyards. And it's hard to manage a lot of people, but in one sense, a collective effort for a common goal is kind of an exciting direction. But also, I know as a winemaker, you learn what it takes to make great grapes in the vineyard. As a buyer, you can talk about it, but you don't have to pay for it in the same way. And so I'd like to see more direct participation in the farming by winemakers to create the destiny of particular vineyards. I think it's a cool direction we might fare well in our area.
Well, folks, this has been fantastic. I'm sure everyone has loved it. I've loved talking and looking at all of y'all's property and what you have done. Just as a reminder to everybody, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we've got Wine and Fire, the event coming up August 12th through the 15th. Many of the events are available online over, you go to Santa Rita Hills, StarRitaHills.com, and you look at the anniversary events, and there's again, like magic, it shows up Wednesday. I mentioned it, and poof, it is there. I should have done that a few times on the golf rounds and mentioned birdies every now and then and seen that they appear just like that does. But somehow that probably wouldn't happen. I appreciate you all. I'll raise a glass to everything you all have done over the last 25, 30 years. Thank you so much for everything and for being here. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Adam.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Earl.
Come visit.
Bye now.
Come visit us.